Okay, I think we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 10th Wirelive. We are going to talk post-pandemic trends, and I am joined by a long-term partner in crime, Mr. Jim Bowes. As I put on LinkedIn when I shared this, it's nice to get the band back together. Jim and I, in the before times, used to record a podcast together called Alexis Dot, which we've been struggling to kind of find a rhythm with in this virtual world. Maybe that's one of the things we'll discuss, what the future of all of these wonderful audio formats looks like. Maybe it's Clubhouse, who knows? But yeah, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Jim to the virtual studio, and we'll get cracking with the conversation. So, Mr. Bowes, how's it going?
Good afternoon, Rob. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. I'm a little bit presumptuous of me to assume that people know who I am and who you are. So I suppose we should probably introduce ourselves. But as is polite, after you, my friend, what's your name? Where do you come from?
My name is Jim Bowes. I come from Somerset, where I live and look onto a dairy farm. But I previously am known for running the digital agency Manifesto, of which I am CEO. Whether anyone can remember that that's what I do now that I've been locked in a barn in Somerset for the last year, who knows? Maybe I'll find out the next time I visit London and try and sort of say hello to some folk who work in the tech business in the UK.
And out of interest, how long has it been since you were in London, where your Jim's traditional home was Shoreditch, where his agency had a very large and lovely office in the before times? When was the last time you visited London?
I think the last time I came to London was when I had dinner with you. I think we had some gnocchi with tomato sauce, some ricotta gnocchi, if I remember correctly. And I had a doctor's appointment, so it wasn't even for anything work related.
Good memory. That feels like years ago. So, hey everyone, Rob, CEO of Wirelive and Paxate UK. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to unpack we're going to do the very dangerous thing, which is we're going to try and make some predictions. Predictions often end up making you look a little bit foolish. And frankly, if ever you had seen two gentlemen who badly needed haircuts as much as Jim and I did, I think today is that day. I mean, I'm looking at you, I'm looking at myself, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is not a good look. And mate, it's kind of working for you. I think it's working for you, but I've definitely never seen you with hair that long before.
I'm not sure everyone in this house concurs.
Maybe. I see. Well, for what it's worth, I think you look great. But look, before we get into the all-important details of predictions and maybe a bit of analysis of what's been going on in the last year, it's nearly Easter, so I think we should cover off the important questions, Jim. And you mentioned on social that you were eager to discuss what the best Easter egg is. So let's get that out of the way early doors. What's your view on this?
Well, look, you probably already know this, but when Manifesto became part of a group called the Panoply, I took a role as Chief Innovation Officer with the group, which I don't do any longer. I'm fully focused on growing Manifesto, again, as CEO of Manifesto. But in my contract with the group, part of my negotiations included the fact that I had to receive each Easter a fruit and nut Easter egg with fruit and nut in the eggshell itself. And I believe the dairy milk, fruit and nut based Cadbury's Easter egg with fruit and nut in the eggshell is the best Easter egg.
It is the one. And I mean, I must say, I always admired the detail you went to in your negotiations there. Not simply one of those chocolate egg with a little bit of fruit and nut inside when you smash it open. No, it had to be in the shell, which that's that attention to detail, which is what makes you such a great leader, I'm sure.
Something like that. But I can say that now I'm no longer playing the group role. I don't have a service contract that includes that. which means I now have to buy my own fruit and nut Easter egg, which I have bought. It was £10, by the way, which was so it was a big. I mean, I'm surprised I didn't have to declare it on my P11D, or I certainly didn't. So if I could be caught up with for that, because I probably should have done. But yeah, I've paid for it myself, and I've already eaten that Easter egg. So it's gone. That ship has sailed this Easter. What's your? I'm also a fan of a chocolate orange Easter egg where there is chocolate orange flavour in the eggshell itself. So there is a bit of a theme for what I think makes a good Easter egg. I like it where one of your favourite chocolate bars has gone to the trouble of forming an entire eggshell out of chocolate with that flavouring.
And if that isn't the magic of technology, I don't know what is. I feel like I should move us on. As much as I'd love to spend another 10 minutes on Easter eggs, it's my own fault for probing the question. I mean, maybe this is a nice segue into 3D printing. So, I mean, look, I think it's fun today. It'll be fun today to just unpack some of the stuff that's happened in the last year, but really look more to the future, right? And look to predictions. So I think one of the things that people have been predicting for a long time is that 3D printing, this new and modern method of fabrication, was going to have its day in the sun. It was going to, final mile production was going to be this thing, and lots of the products that we were going to buy and use might get made in warehouses within, proximity to where we lived, rather than made in China and shipped over on big boats. Haha, Suez Canal. Maybe there are good reasons why that might be a good thing for the future without these kind of long distribution chains, as has been very relevant in the last few weeks. And I think, 3D printing, it's fair to say, did have a bit of a moment, didn't it? As people were rapidly producing all the PPE equipment. I mean, a guy in the Wirelive team, John Totten, made a load of face masks for a local hospital. And so it was great to see that sort of distributed manufacturing kicking in. I suppose my question to you is, do you think that's a trend that now continues? Do you think we're going to see that kind of catch on in a bigger way? Or do you think maybe it sort of fades away again and it's going to take another 10 years before it catches on?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I remember when all the original hype of 3D printing was around, and I actually, for the whole company, we did a team day that was so everybody in the company could learn the basics of 3D printing, because I was like, this is so exciting, and this is going to change our lives really soon. And then we did a project with Paul McCartney, which was around the ability to print a 3D Paul McCartney. And that was really the last of 3D printing in Manifesto's life, which was associated with some game release that he'd created some music for. And I think after that period, it really sort of fell into, there's people who are still into this, but it's really, really niche. Whilst those more broad applications, so I'd seen some really interesting things with how Adidas planned to make it so that pairs of trainers could be sort of printed on site effectively. But I think the sort of technology for that was sort of being developed and coming along and trying to sort of find its meaningful purpose. I think while that was happening in the background, the sort of that hype sort of faded away. And then you do get these little peaks, but I still think in reality, we are a while away from 3D printing playing a significant role in the day-to-day lives of people. I'd say maybe it is still 5 to 10 years. I don't know. Did you agree?
Yeah, I think so. For me, so my prediction on 3D printing is that it will continue to be a really important part of how modern manufacturing is taking place, but it will still be done in a kind of mass production way. So I think this idea of distributing production to the edge isn't that relevant yet, and might not be for quite a while. But I think, you used Adidas, great example. Adidas have got this sort of industry leading technique where they're producing the boost layer at the bottom of their very popular trainers from ocean plastics. And that technique is only possible because of this very sophisticated 3D printing stuff they're doing. But they're still doing it in factories, right? And mass producing in that way. So, certain car parts 3D printed now. I think the technique of 3D printing is a massive trend that is going to really disrupt the way products can be designed and built over the next 10 years. And it's nice to see the sustainability angle being a big part of that, like how to use new and interesting materials that are only possible because of that. But I still don't think everyone's going to have a 3D printer in their kitchen. I love it. It's sort of the Jetsons, isn't it? But I think sadly that's probably still a way off.
I think it's transformative for some industries and some, like, I think maybe even like experiential agencies. If I look at the sort of space close to Manifesto, back, I can't even remember what year the Athens Olympics were, a long time ago, but I was working on the golf and trainer brand Mizuno's stand at the Athens Olympics, and we needed to get some custom stands made for the trainers, and that meant getting tooling set up in China or somewhere that had a big manufacturing base, just to make this sort of one-off pop-up for the Olympics. And I think things like that are like really obvious applications where, we didn't need the tools to print 1 million copies of these stands. We just needed one pop-up shop in Athens for like a month. And I do think that it's also something that may start to affect the more experiential end of the agency industry as well.
So there we go. There's Jim and Rob's first post-pandemic prediction. 3D printing is not going to arrive in your homes, but will definitely arrive in the products that you buy, wear, consume, and may provide some interesting innovation for things like experiential agencies.
Hey Rob, do you know what? This week, we'll stand by it. But do you know what I did this week?
What did you do, Jim?
What I did was I went back through our predictions for 2020, which we wrote in 2019 before we knew there was going to be a global pandemic. We didn't predict a global pandemic, by the way, but we also did predict some other things. We talked a lot about the environment. We made some predictions about Amazon, and we talked a lot about transparency. But one of our predictions was that Twitter would take a back seat. But with the Black Lives Matter movement and the presidential shenanigans of the Trump era, I think we probably were slightly off the money when it came to Twitter taking a back seat.
Yeah, I mean, although since Trump got booted out, it does seem like it's sort of starting to slide again. So maybe we were early but not wrong with that one. We'll have to wait and see. But
ahead of our time.
Was there anything else in there that really? Yeah, exactly. Was there anything else in there that really stood out?
Well, I suppose the environmental stuff, I think it probably was sort of on the money, and that sort of expectation of big tech like Amazon to really increase their level of transparency. I think we definitely saw more about that in this year. So I think we were probably in a good place on that. And yeah, what else? I suppose that we were also just talking about democracy and the role of privacy and things like that, and how the big tech was going to have to do more. And I think we did see some evidence of that, but maybe not as far as lots of people would like.
Yeah. It's still a way to go there. I mean, I think let's move to some other sort of key trends that have been quite disruptive over the last year, and then look at what the prediction is. So I think the next trend I'd like to just talk about briefly is this sort of shift to video conferencing, and this kind of, I'm sure people are tired of hearing everybody talk about Zoom and Teams and how it's, changing everything. But, I think one of the areas that's been really successful as a result of this is actually hardware based. So if you look at the Facebook portal devices, which is surprisingly good, I'm not trying to be a Facebook advert here, but they're actually much better devices than you perhaps would expect, given Facebook isn't exactly a hardware manufacturer. So Facebook had a portal device which they'd already launched, but just was sort of in the right place at the right time. And they come in 3 sizes. Wow, I really am selling them now. They come in 3 sizes. There's a sort of small, medium, or one that you put on top of a telly, and they track you around a bit. And they have a good sort of microphone and speakers in them. So they just sort of take the pain out of video conferencing and make it really straightforward for people. And they've sold like mad. I mean, they've been hugely successful as a result of this. And I think what people are realizing, it's funny how you sometimes need like a trigger event for change to happen. What people are realizing is that video conferencing is actually really, really good for certain things that they didn't do before. Like, you've got a young daughter. I think that's a great example for your parents to see their grandchildren easily and frequently, particularly if they don't live nearby, video conferencing using a device that will follow your toddler around the room, right, and just kind of make the whole experience quite seamless is really, really useful. And those things I don't think would have happened had there not been this sort of necessity to shift towards them. And so it's forced everybody to get really used to the idea of doing human interaction in that way. And so my prediction is that is going to stay. I think the proliferation of video conferencing is now out of the bottle, as it were, and we're only going to see more and more of that over the years ahead. It's going to be completely socially normal forevermore to just do meetings on video conferencing rather than in person, and for lots of sort of family catch-up, social interaction type stuff to happen via video conferencing as well. What do you think? Do you think I'm on the money there?
I think it depends what your family are like. So I reckon my family are still a pretty face-to-face bunch. I agree, like with the sort of grandparent regular catch-ups with grandchildren. I think that's true. I think that's something that will happen. But I think those sort of bigger family gatherings, I think people in my family will definitely still be focusing on the. So I've done relatively few catch-ups where like more than just my mom or more than just my partner's parents have joined the call. So I think I'm sure some families have like gone in hard on the quiz every Friday with the whole family, but that hasn't really been the vibe in my family. We've done a couple with my brother. So I think, yes, I think in some families it will really like hang around in a bigger sense. But I know that the first thing all of my family plan to do is visit me as soon as they're allowed to. So, but I think for those sort of more like one house to one other house interactions, I think it will definitely stick around. I think the other thing that's really fascinating about this technology is that the high quality video conferencing cameras and hardware that were associated with the business space were generally several £1,000s for each piece of kit. And you sort of take a portal where you're sort of looking at a couple of £100. It really is sort of sub 10% the cost of doing this for business. So I also think businesses will start using some of this lower end consumer tech for meeting some of their commercial needs. And I think the big thing that Facebook did was enabling Zoom to work on their portal products, which I think is a real game changer. And I think, when they launched those products, they only worked with Messenger and with WhatsApp, and they've sort of opened that door to them being a more adoptable technology.
Yeah, for sure. And so there we go. Maybe that can be our second prediction, is that businesses will start to take advantage of the consumer grade, as it were, video conferencing capabilities that have become mainstream and therefore at a much more accessible price point. So that's a good prediction. And I think for me, this sort of maps to a point about the future of office space and how people are going to use their workspaces. And let's just go there now, right? So you're back holding the reins of Manifesto full time. Not that you ever stopped, but you had other responsibility as well. So you're very focused on Manifesto again, completely. What does your vision for Manifesto look like in the future with regards to location, right? I mean, as you've said, you're now in a barn in Somerset. It seems unlikely you're going to spend 5 days a week in Shoreditch ever again from where I'm sitting, and I would understand why. What's your vision for the business as a whole, for the team? How does video conferencing play into that? How does technology play into that? What's your prediction for how that all maps out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much to unpack here that it's really fascinating. I think there's firstly, there's the sort of link to video conferencing, and I think there's some associated technologies that have come into the workplace. So in our workplace, there's tools like Miro, and I think there's products like that, or Miro, Mural, Lucid, which were, I guess, virtual whiteboards and collaborative drawing and charting applications that I think those were sort of like the sort of things that user experience teams or designers used previously as parts of how they did some things, which have now become mass products of collaboration along with the video conferencing software. So, and I'm delivering training this week where there's a tool being rolled out in an organization, and I'm using the tools that are being rolled out by that organization in parallel to delivering the training, which is essentially on a different topic. So I'm sort of delivering sort of multiple aspects of that transformation into an organization, which helps them be a more effective remote business or more effective hybrid business. For Manifesto, We have a lease that runs out in May on our main Shoreditch office, which means that we have an interesting decision to make in what is the future of our London office, in a period of time where we haven't yet quite returned to or established what our new preferences are in the real world. So we have survey data from our team. We have lots of wonderful articles by lots of people saying what they think the future of work is going to be like, but we don't actually know how that's going to manifest itself. We believe people want to use office facilities some of the time. Most people 1 to 2 days a week, and they want to use it for focusing on collaboration and social interaction with their colleagues. What that means for us is, I think, the end of us fitting out, running our own office, having our own office manager, paying for our own utilities, paying a service charge, all of those sorts of things that we've done for the last decade of running the business, or about 7 years of the last decade running the business. And what we are in sort of final discussions on is to take out a new shared workspace, two shared workspaces in 2 different cities from the start of June. And even those 2 spaces combined couldn't fit all of our staff in. So if we say we've got about 60 people in London, we are looking at getting 20 desks, basically.
Interesting. So when you do want to bring the whole company together in person, which I assume you will want to do at least once a year, what's your thinking then for how you'll facilitate that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think firstly, I want to do that more often than annually. I think we'll probably look to do something quarterly, probably. We've also in this period changed our operating model and moved to a divisional structure. So we have there's like a tension between how frequently the divisions get together themselves and how frequently bring the whole company together. And we're still sort of learning and working through some of that. But I think we will either do something completely different, that is maybe not even in London, or uses an alternative space in London. So in July, I'm looking at doing a festival that will bring people together, where they can camp and we can all have a good time and that kind of thing, which will be a sort of purely sort of social occasion, and trying to take advantage of the period of time where I perceive the pandemic-related risk to be at its lowest, so that there's the highest chance we'd be able to all get together safely. And we're not close to sort of October, when there is perhaps some risk that there could be some restrictions again next winter. So I think ultimately we will spend some money on making gatherings where we all come together good in terms of venue and the other aspects of them. And that will be, so whilst on paper, you save lots and lots of money, or it looks like you do, I think we will probably spend some more money on transport, and we'll certainly spend some more money on bringing people together more often.
Yeah, interesting. That sort of resonates with our thinking as well. So over the last since January, when we announced the acquisition of Wirelive by Pax8, we have been going on this really interesting journey of sort of bringing the businesses together. And so I'm overseeing Pax8's UK operation and kind of bridging to the US. And so in the UK, we've got Wirelive's office in Farnborough. We've got a shared workspace in Bristol, where Pax8's sort of headquartered in the UK, and all of our sort of new hires are going in. And so we've kind of got both versions already, right? We've got kind of flexible, shared inverted commas workspace, and we've got full-time digs that we fitted out and kind of done ourselves. So we're starting to see how those things stack up side by side. And actually, in the US, so the business is growing so quickly that we don't have enough desks now for everybody to go back to the office in the offices we were in, because we've hired so many people during the pandemic year that we're now, 20-30% over capacity for the building that we were in. So there's this big debate going on at the moment, sort of philosophically, about, well, what do we do? Do we need, maybe we go your way and we don't actually need a desk for every person, because the world's changed and more people want to work from home. And, the surveys are that pretty much everybody doesn't want to work from the office 5 days a week. So you kind of, there's kind of a capacity thing there that might work. I think one thing that seems to keep coming out, and this is a prediction I'll make as part of, as we get to a predictions element here, is that people hate the hoteling idea with desks. People hate hot desking, right? Like fundamentally, people want somewhere to stick their picture and have their own mug, and it's like this very human thing to like want your own space that is yours that you don't share. And I don't think anybody's quite figured that out yet. I think that's one of the big tensions with this idea of not having full capacity for your team, is that ultimately you've got to do, some people are going to have to share then. And maybe there are solutions to that we haven't figured out yet. Maybe there'll be sort of whole like desk fittings that you sort of take and put in your locker and then you stick on your desk when it's your desk for the day. Or I don't know, it's a bit of a wacky idea, but you know what I mean? Like maybe there's a kind of hack to kind of give people their home away from home. Or maybe people will just become accustomed to it. And these are trends that evolve over time. But so my prediction is that there will be an ongoing tension that companies feel between giving people their own private spaces, their own desk, their own corner office, whatever it might be, their own chair they can set up just how they like, and that desire to be more flexible, like you're saying, because it doesn't make any sense at all to take huge offices and have them only 50% full. And frankly, it's not a very nice experience for the people that are in those offices. It feels a bit empty, right, when you've got half an office at capacity. So, I think we're going to see some really interesting solutions to that problem emerge over the next few years. And I don't think anybody's quite cracked it yet, is my instinct. What do you reckon?
Is that our startup idea? Is a cleaning company, an office cleaning company that also turns the desks for who they're meant to be for? So you have an itinerary and it's like, who's in tomorrow? And then you know exactly how they all have it. And it's like a premium cleaning service that just gets it just so for the exact set of people who are in.
Yeah, puts the half-drunk coffee back on the desk from the person who always leaves it there, and they go home. Yeah, exactly. Maybe seems crazy to think, but I do think there's something very important about that sense of belonging to a space and your interaction with it. And I'm not sure. I think that's quite a physical problem, right? I don't think that's a tech problem per se. So yeah, I think that's an interesting dilemma. I mean, I think the other trend that I would like to lean into, and this I'll propose this as a prediction, and you can agree and support or disagree. So, a prediction I have is that there's a real drive, about time, right? There's a real drive to increase the diversity in businesses. I think the discussion on diversity is now an open one that everybody can have without any real fear of repercussion. And I think maybe that's slightly rose tinted, but it's certainly improving. And I think one of the things that businesses really struggle with when they try to hire a more diverse workforce is the availability of talent in the area they locate themselves. And this is one of the things we're really excited about with Pax8 opening up employment into new areas. Is we think we can then go to the places where there is a more diverse talent pool and recruit from those places. And so I think that's the other big trend prediction I would make about like the future of workspace, is it allows businesses to finally dip their toe into new talent pools and different places, and maybe gives people a fighting chance of actually changing the balance a little bit in terms of diversity. What do you reckon?
I think the biggest challenge when it comes to altering a system that is like the product of sort of systemic inequality or systemic racism or systemic lack of gender equality, whatever aspect of it is when it comes to sort of diversity and inclusion and equity, is that the constructs in our businesses are not such, in most businesses, not in all businesses, to sufficiently support people who come from less advantaged backgrounds or from different backgrounds in being successful in those workplaces. And I actually think that is the more significant challenge than so finding that the right talent pools, or giving people the opportunity, or making the opportunity, the access to opportunity more equal, is a challenge. But I also then think actually understanding the context that you or I are from, and how many contextual norms there are for us, that we just know what to do in certain situations because of the backgrounds that we've come from and what we've been around. I think actually the most significant challenge is creating the right environment and the right support for people to perform at their best and be successful. And I think that I think there will be many businesses. My prediction would be there will be many businesses that try really hard to hire up a more diverse workforce and then struggle with retention.
Very interesting. Great. I mean, that's another strong prediction, I think, and one that I totally agree with everything you've said. I think you've articulated that really well, and it's a really interesting challenge, and one that I'm looking forward to seeing people tackle. I think it should also, by proxy, allow for the regeneration of areas that perhaps lacked commercial opportunity. And I think this sort of leads into another trend I wanted to talk about the proximity of where people live and work, and this sort of the death of like the urban center, and whether that's a short-term thing or a long-term thing. There's, one of the big trends was in America, which was the New York was really badly hit by the pandemic, and obviously is an incredibly dense urban metropolis. And obviously in America, New York is the home of the financial services industry. That's where Wall Street is, as I'm sure everyone watching knows. And there was this real sort of, oh God, what's the word? Departure. There was this, this huge exodus from New York to other places, because actually financial services, really all you need is an internet connection and a couple of screens to do the job most people do in FS. And when you can't enjoy the delights of New York when it's open, there's really no point being there, because it's dirty and claustrophobic, and there's not much green space, relatively speaking, and stuff like that. And so lots of people moved, and the place that a lot of people moved to was Florida, particularly Miami. Miami's been this real talking point in America recently. And now, as they're starting to come out of their severe lockdowns in New York, what people weren't predicting was that everybody would go back, but it seems that people are starting to go back. And if you read interviews, it's quite funny. Like, there's sort of Wall Street bigwigs saying, the problem with moving to Florida and living in Miami is that you have to be in Florida, right? Like, it's like it made sense at the time, but actually they don't really want to be there. There's a lot that they loved about New York and that kind of everything that it stood for and what you get for being in an urban city. So I think I'm really on the fence about this one. I think you and I are good examples of that. We were very London centric. We both left London and have no plans to go back. And I mean, I don't think I can't see that changing for me. And, as Matt said in the chat, your barn looks lovely, Jim. And it is lovely. I can report viewers, and I can't see Jim leaving anytime soon either. So some people definitely aren't going back to the sort of city life. We'll visit, but we won't sort of be permanently based there. So I do think that's a prediction that will stick. But I suppose my question to you is, where do you think the needle lands? Do you think largely cities will rejuvenate back to what they were, or do you think there's a real permanent shift there that will be lasting?
I think we have to sort of segment this up a little bit, because I think there's a big difference between New York and London and somewhere like Preston or a smaller town somewhere. So I think I think there's those towns across the country where the erosion of the high street is a trend that we've seen for years, and we've obviously seen some incredibly significant failures during the pandemic. And my prediction would be that we've not seen the worst of the impact, because obviously there's enormous government support still in place. But even when we've not seen the bulk of the impact of the high street in the town centres, we've lost Topshop and Debenhams and people like that during the pandemic already. And so I think the fact that there won't be a Topshop on that corner in Oxford Street in London, I don't think that's an issue for London, because I think people will return to London. It's one of the most amazing global cities. Young people want to come there to hang out with other young people, with all the makers and creators that are there. And whilst quite a few people left London, there's still an awful lot of people there, and still an awful lot to attract people there. And the same is true of New York. I think when you look at those sort of more those seaside towns, and I was sort of trying to pick towns. There's a thing set up by the Bloomberg Foundation, or part of the Bloomberg Foundation plus the government, are doing a thing called the Towns Fund, which is about regenerating specific towns across the world. In fact, Bournemouth, I think, is one of them as well, which is near you. And I think you've got this much more systemic. The economy of this place has structurally altered in the internet era kind of issue that's been accelerated during the pandemic. And I think what I hope is that some of these projects like the Towns Fund work. And what you normally see, what I think is that there's a lag between the land and property owners accepting the true future value of their assets in some of these places, which are now lower. And then there's this point where artists and cultural things move in, and then really interesting stuff happens. And that's not going to happen everywhere, but in some places, I think it will create really interesting opportunities for sort of artistic and cultural regeneration. And that's what I would hope for. That's the optimist in me.
So I think that's certainly a great prediction. And like you say, it's not going to happen everywhere, but I think it is clearly happening in some places already, and it doesn't in a small area, in a relatively small town or village or whatever, it doesn't take much to really materially move it on actually and make it much more attractive. And then you get that kind of snowball effect, don't you? Suddenly somebody goes, oh, I can do my job from here, and actually I'd love to open an amazing local cafe, right, in a place that didn't previously had like a pub and a post office. And then suddenly the next person comes and goes, oh, there's a cool local cafe, I could live here, maybe I'll open a restaurant or an art gallery or whatever, and life sort of takes hold, and things gentrify and become richer, and better services crop up. So it does sort of happen organically, doesn't it, if you can get it started?
And there are a couple of interesting trends that relate to this, because we've got things like the rollout of fiber broadband, which helps some of the sort of creative, particularly the sort of internet creative discipline sort of spread. But you've also got the fact that the pandemic, particularly, but perhaps there was a movement before, but certainly the pandemic has caused an enormous increase in community-based spirit. A big increase in certain types of volunteering, not all, but community apps and apps like Nextdoor have seen, and apps like Olio, which let people like share things like a saw or a drill. There's been an enormous increase in those sort of local and community. And so if you look at sort of local as a theme, we kind of started there with 3D printing. Yes, there's the sort of manufacturing and the delivery and all of that side to it, but there's also sort of community local and then the sort of environment local. And I think you see a series of small trends come together to go, actually, people quite like the idea of getting the most out of their community and locality, and many will have found greater happiness in not rushing about quite as much over the last year.
Yeah, totally. And speaking personally, I do think the complexion of my tolerance for 6 hours of traveling for a 1 hour meeting is permanently has permanently changed. Like, I think the idea of going to Manchester to meet somebody for lunch just seems like the most ridiculous idea now. And I mean, frankly, it probably seemed a little bit ridiculous before, but you just did it, right? Because it was the way it was done. And so, I think some things like that have permanently shifted. As much as I love,
what would you do now?
Traveling up the Pendo for a lunch. What would I do now? What's the alternative? Good question, because actually having a Zoom call is not really a good alternative to that experience. I don't know.
Unless you both order the same thing on Deliveroo.
And as we've established, having done it ourselves in lockdown, it's all right, but it's not it's not the same, is it? So it's it'll be really interesting to see how that all plays out. But so I mean, talking a little bit more then about what the new normal might look like. So let's talk about lateral flow tests. Let's talk about cashless society. Let's talk about like what's going to happen as a result of this pandemic not going away anytime soon, and the things that we think will permanently change as a result, and kind of go there with predictions. So the Welsh government, I think last week, have said that regardless of what happens with vaccinations, masks and social distancing it will be in place until Easter of 22. So they're saying at least another year in Wales, social distancing and masks, even though they'll relax, the groupings and all that kind of stuff. So that's their position. Germany are currently looking at doing another lockdown. Italy are applying more curfews right now. This thing isn't going to just disappear. Sorry if you're watching this and you thought it was. It's not going to. We are going to live with this forever, probably in some shape or form, much like we do the cold and flu. And the real question actually is, when's the next one? It seems, there will be other coronavirus strains. There have been others before. This is the only one that's been such a global problem. So, this idea of sort of controlling spread of new viruses is something that I think is going to be with us perhaps for our lifetimes, right? So how do we solve that problem? And I think one of the things I see coming is testing. For me, testing has always been this big sort of problem that they needed to resolve, because as soon as you can get to the point where lateral flow tests, if you're watching and you don't know what that means, a way to work out if you have coronavirus or not very quickly and cheaply without some invasive test. Imagine you spit in a little tube and shake a thing, and in 30 seconds it tells you if you're positive or not. Once those are available at the door of every restaurant, in Germany, they're doing experiments at a local level where at the perimeter of like town centers, they have tests available. And so as you arrive at the perimeter of the village town center or whatever, you do a test. And if you pass, you're allowed in, no masks, no distancing. So they create sort of safe zones. And once you're within the zone, you can then live a very normal life. I think those types of things are going to be a trend. I think it's not unlikely that within the next year or two, there will be offices that operate like that, where they have a massive box of lateral flow tests at the door. And everyone's told, look, if you've got a temperature, don't even turn up. If you think you're fine, come to work, come to the office, do a test. And if your test's clear, take your mask off and enjoy your time, living free and easy. So it seems like that stuff's sticking around. We'll give you a chance to chime in. What do you think about this one?
I think you're right about offices, particularly. So I think the sharing economy is interesting, because the sharing economy became temporarily very unappealing in the pandemic, and then will find its feet again. And obviously shared offices are part of that. And I think Manifesto's Bristol office, they were taking your temperature there on the way in really early in the pandemic last year. So I think if they had a way of testing you in 30 seconds, I have no doubt that they would happily take that up. I think what will happen is, I think as the global vaccination starts to slow the mutation, I mean, we're getting into science now and medical science, which is like not my strongest point, but while I believe when the virus is replicating less and it's obviously getting less opportunity to mutate, and we've got consistent proven data of people who've been vaccinated being very unlikely to be hospitalized, I think you'll see a good year of people taking this exceptionally seriously, and then with hospitalization and things like that being at near normal levels, I think you'll gradually see a relaxation thereafter. That would be my prediction. But with, as you say, better test and trace facilities set up in the UK, which I think there was probably better facilities in Germany than we had, and certainly countries that had like SARS or MERS, like South Korea, had much better facilities and already some cultural behaviours that related to things like this happening.
Yeah, for sure. There's also a couple of other really cool experiments going on as people try and figure out what the realities of this new situation is. So in the Netherlands, there's two I've heard about. There's one where they're doing a music festival. I think it's 1,500 people are invited, and they test everyone on arrival, and then they let everybody do a normal festival, and they tell them no masks, hug, kiss, whatever, have fun. It's a music festival, live a
Mosh
little.
pit.
Those Dutchies, eh? Bong and a crepe or whatever. And afterwards, they send everybody home, and then they test them on the way out, and then a week later, and they're collecting a huge data set to see like what happens, right? And they're doing the same thing with football games. I think there's 2 or 3 football games where they're doing full stadiums, no masks, no social distancing, like just basically guinea pigging it, right? Just being like, well, we've never really dealt with this before. We're now at a point where we think we understand well enough how to treat this and what the hospital capacity would be if it was to go wrong. And so they're trying it. Do you fancy that? Should we see if we can get on the list for a guinea pig music festival? I'm not sure I'd go.
I think there were something like 25,000 applications to go to that festival. I was listening to because it's happened. I listened to some of the audio at the weekend on the radio of it in progress, and there was actually a mosh pit happening. When you said bong and a crepe, though, I'm like, what made me think was, is that someone who's headlining the dance stage? Could be the name of a dodgy 90s dance act, maybe. But yeah, I think would I go? I mean, I'm really up for a festival. I've got tickets to the local festival here, Summer Stock, in Somerset, which is happening on the 10th of July, which is like 3,000 people. And I'm like, well, that's a good number. Like, do I really feel like being in amongst it at Glastonbury this year? And obviously it's not happening, but I would feel uncomfortable with 180,000 people together. But I sort of think 3,000 people with quite a lot of fresh air between you. We know that transmission outside is actually very low. So I think I would have a preference for outdoor stages rather than sweaty dance tents this year, at least. And I'll be really interested in the data as it comes out. But I'm obviously looking at organising a work festival for up to 250 people, and I'm also looking at going to one the following weekend. So hopefully I haven't turned into some kind of super spreader in the early part of July.
Well, we'll have to check back later in the year and see. And yeah, my other prediction is that everybody's going to get really sick of weddings. I've been invited to 3 weddings over a 3-week period in Derbyshire, Cornwall, and Kent. Right, so my suit is going to get some mileage out of it for my summer suit for those 3 weeks. So yeah, slightly tongue in cheek, but I think there is clearly going to be this kind of like rush to public gatherings again, understandably, as everybody's just desperate to get out and like you say, 25,000 people with 1,500 tickets. I think that sort of says it all, doesn't it? So yeah.
Well, the risk is completely unproven, and they're still like super up for it. I think I'm a little bit older than you. Less people getting married in my life than you. So because we were due to go to one last May, and those people just went off and got married, like the 2 of them plus some witnesses or something, in a window of opportunity. So the wedding slate has been cleaned, actually, I think, for this year. But who knows? Some might start cropping up. There was an announcement of an engagement today at work, but who knows if I'll make the cut on that list.
Oh, maybe they're watching, Jim. And now they feel suitably awkward, so they'll have to send over an invite. Look, we're getting close to time. The only thing I had slated that I thought would be fun to talk about was just the kind of cash-free thing. But I mean, there's not really much to say, is there, other than cash is basically dead as a form of payment and is not going to come back in any meaningful way, other than as a tax dodge for people who prefer not to fully declare their income, it would seem to me. When was the last time you handled money? Do you have anybody in your life you have to pay with cash still?
I paid a window cleaner with some cash. Well, that was the last time. And I've paid a delivery driver with some cash. Those are the last 2 cash transactions in my life, which were both at the specific request of the person just, I imagine, to help them remember it really clearly so they could declare it honestly on their tax returns. And I think, but I found it very limited. I mean, I think everywhere that everywhere that you buy coffees, and I think it's actually really accelerated the adoption of universal cashlessness, even in pretty rural places, which I think, it's a good thing. I think that those systems and things are really reliable now. I think there is still a massive black market and sort of less honest part of the economy that has survived on cash for a really long time, and I don't really know where that will go. I mean, some of it may have moved to cryptocurrency, of course, but presumably not all criminals are savvy enough to use cryptocurrencies for their activity. So I feel like there are some things like that driving cash. And I think there is obviously also that sort of like digital divide of, plenty of older people who are incredibly technology savvy, very happy with the digitization of things. But there is also a significant cohort that aren't. And so we have to just be conscious of that sort of exclusion gap, which, has previously sort of extended the time in which checks are being phased out and things like that. So I think what becomes a challenge for the sort of institutions that administer these things is that they become increasingly expensive for them to run for a decreasing audience. But I think there will be a very long tail.
Yeah, for sure. And crypto is one of those funny odd things, because people think of crypto as this sort of alternative, but actually the way all blockchains work is it's a public ledger, right? So there's no, like, you couldn't have a less anonymous way to make a payment. It's there forever. You can't hide it, even if you wanted to after the fact. So, so there's another prediction for you. Tax offices are going to come down hard on everybody's crypto stuff. So if you've got a load of Bitcoin profit and you haven't declared it, expect a call from HMRC at some point in the next few years. The IRS now, on the forms that you have to fill out as an American citizen every year, every American citizen has to do this. They specifically ask you if you own any cryptocurrencies, and it is a federal offense to lie on that form. It's like a really serious thing to misrepresent on those forms. So, the long arm of Her Majesty's revenue is coming for your crypto transactions. There's another prediction for everybody. But
I guess people can still sort of
go on.
People can sort of still obfuscate, I guess, whilst there is a ledger of where things came and went to. I guess people do obfuscate the actual wallets themselves and things. I'm sure that, we could probably do an episode on how to anonymously extract money from Bitcoin, because I would be educated in that. I did want to mention one other crypto thing, which is perhaps more a trend than a prediction, but I have seen a pretty much constant stream of NFT related stuff. So I'd be interested to get your short view on whether you think non-fungible tokens, which you can probably do a really quickly articulated explanation of, are really a thing. And do you think, I guess I sort of see it as like the proof of ownership of digital antiques is the kind of primary use case that is being talked about at the moment.
Yeah, in the 5 minutes we've got, I think I'll struggle to cover NFTs in any great detail, but the NFT space is extremely frothy at the moment. I'd be amazed if anybody hasn't at least seen the acronym floating around, even if they've not really dived into it. The big story really in the NFT space has been driven by NBA Top Shots, which is so NBA as in basketball in America. Top Shots is a sort of digital trading card thing, a bit like, Panini stickers, right? When we were lads, that you get your Panini stickers, you go to the newsagent, you buy a pack and you open them and you hope you get the ones you want, you stick them in your book. Imagine sort of like a cool digital version of that, only it's videos and they're tradable and they're sort of vaguely unique. So Top Shots has been
like
a massive
$250,000 for a good
US. Some of them are, yeah, which is why it's a bit of a bubble at the moment, I think. But then, at the other end of the spectrum is some people think it's like the future of fine art. And there's an artist called Beeple who sold a piece of work it was auctioned at Christie's for $69 million, which meant his works are now worth more than the highest value works from the likes of Dali, which is just ridiculous, frankly. But fair play to the guy. It's a new world out there, and the NFT kind of idea, like you say, of creating digital assets or digital antiques, as you put it. That's quite a nice phrase there, Jim. You should trademark that. It is here to stay. And I think, as always, with these kind of new and interesting technologies that have a lot of money flying around in them, there's a bit of a gold rush going on. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, well, how do I capitalize on this commercially? I mean, the lesson of gold rushes is that you're better off selling pickaxes than refining for gold. So I think people creating systems around the NFT ecosystem are doing very well and will probably continue to do well. If you're thinking about buying NFTs as investments, I would caution you fairly severely. I think a lot of the stuff being bought today will ultimately end up being worth basically nothing. But then that's the speculative joy of bubbles, right? Some of it may genuinely end up being a collector's item and being, the future works of our generation. So, there's a lot of dross in there, but there is some kind of interesting stuff going on too. And I think the NFT trend, my prediction is NFTs are going to stick around. This isn't like a flash in the pan. The idea of an NFT, a unique digital asset that you can own and transfer online makes sense to me. Like, it's a bit like Bitcoin was kind of the money for the internet. NFTs is sort of like a way of creating a physical asset in the digital world, and with the same sort of associated ownership that goes with it. And will there be billionaires in the future who have digital picture frames displaying their NFTs? Yeah, I think there will be. And there's already some quite interesting stuff coming out there, so you can do that, right? You can have like a big frame in your hallway with your NFTs kind of cycling through. It's
had
science
those
fiction,
for years,
but
those
it's going on.
picture frames that can rotate a JPEG.
and what's funny is fundamentally that's basically what it is, right? Which is why it's so ridiculous. But anyway, look, NFTs is probably another episode in itself, but thanks for bringing that up. That is definitely another trend. So, Jim, it's been an absolute delight, my friend, to talk to you. I hope some of our viewers have enjoyed our slightly vague ramblings about some predictions, but we've got some solid stuff in there too. Any final thoughts? Any shout outs? Anything to say?
It's just been a pleasure and a joy to spend an hour with you. I'm looking forward to catching up as soon as rules allow.
Yeah, likewise, my friend. All right, that's a wrap. That's Wirelive episode 10. Hopefully some interesting insights for all of you watching in there. And if you've got any follow-up questions or you'd like help navigating this weird and wonderful year that we all have ahead, then do get in touch. And thanks for watching. See you later.